Welcome in again to the ESPN Fantasy Virtual Summit. Normally we're hanging out in Bristol after the draft. This year we're doing it all from home as we continue to stay safe. Field Yates along with Matthew Berry, Matt Bowen, and Mike Clay. And it's the running back show. So Matthew, I was thinking we could just do the entirety of the show dedicated to the 412 backs on the Redskins roster.
I'm here. Let's do it. Let's break down Peyton Barber, baby. Let's do 20 minutes on J.D. McKissick. I'm here for that.
You have lots of thoughts, I'm sure. Mike Clay, always good to catch up with you, my friend.
Good to be here.
And Matt Bowen, as always. Let's talk running backs. Matt Bowen, who watches more film than NFL coaches themselves, has plenty of opinions and thoughts. Hello, Matt.
How are you doing, Field?
I'm doing well. Hope everybody is staying safe during this crazy time right now. Let's start with running backs. And, guys, we don't have to waste any time on Christian McCaffrey. We all know that he is the consensus 1.01, not just like the best running back in fantasy this year, like the number one pick in fantasy football this season. So the conversation gets interesting at pick number 2. So Matt Bowen, let's examine a world where you had the second pick in a fantasy draft. Presumably you're going with a running back. There's a host of guys that are in the mix amongst our rankers as the number 2 player in fantasy. Who might your number 2 player be?
Well, I think the highest floor for me would be Zeke, right? It would be Zeke. But let's look at this from a bigger picture. In Dallas draft, CeeDee Lamb. When we think we're going to see more 3 wide receiver personnel this year, right? Is there be more balance in that offense, especially with Dak and the boot and the flash and passing game? What about Dalvin Cook? Can we talk about Dalvin Cook? I know the durability concerns. Look at the offense, Field. The same offensive carryover they're going to have in Minnesota this year. Outside zone, flash and passing game. He's excellent in the screen game. Last season, he led the NFL with 29 goal-to-go touches as well. So, when Minnesota gets inside the plus 10-yard line, that's where the football is going. And like I said, the durability, I get it. But when you watch the tape and he's healthy, no one hits the hole with more speed coming downhill. So if I had to make a pick, probably Zeke, higher floor. But if I want to be a little bit more riskier and take a shot, I'd go Dalvin Cook.
Mike, we'll remember last year's Saquon Barkley season as not a disappointment, but just not quite up to the hype. Should he be the number 2 back off the board this year, though?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a pretty decent tier. Matt just broke down the other top options. But looks at last year's Saquon Barkley, he missed 3 games. It felt underwhelming, but he finished up strong, and he remained a workhorse. Like, his targets were down, but his snap share when he was active was up. His carries per game were up, and he was actually the number 3 scoring fantasy running back during his 12 full weeks. That was with like minimal goal line work, only 7 carries inside the 5. I think that will go up this season. You also have an offensive line that's quietly getting a lot better, especially after they picked Andrew Thomas in the first round. So I think there's a lot to like. It was an underwhelming second season, but we saw his upside when he was a rookie. I think he bounces back in a big way here in 2020.
All right, Matthew, you get to break the tie, even though I'm not sure we necessarily are in a 1 versus 1. But who would be your pick for the number 2 back off the board?
It's interesting. I have them right there, just right next to each other. I don't think you can go wrong with either, but as of right now, I would go with Saquon Barkley. Again, when we were doing the quarterback show, Field, I talked up Daniel Jones. I'm excited about the entire Giants offense, that I think they'll be a lot better than people give them credit for. Last year, with a bunch of guys in and out of the lineup, and Daniel Jones is a rookie coming into that starting role midseason, replacing Eli, they were still 13th in touchdowns, right? I mean, it was still a team that scored quite a bit, and we expect Daniel Jones to make a nice leap this year. We expect all their skill guys to be healthy. As Mike mentioned, their offensive line has gotten better. Get this about Saquon Barkley. For his career, he's averaging 4.83 yards per carry. He's had 20 or more fantasy points in basically 60% of all the games he's played. And you think about for his career, since he's come to the NFL, I know it's only 2 years, but he's averaging 119 scrimmage yards per game. That's 3rd best in the NFL since he came into the NFL. And again, I expect the Giants offense as a whole to be better this year than it has been at any of the first 2 years that Saquon Barkley's been in the league. You have to nitpick a little bit here, but give me Saquon.
Yeah, I'll go right back to you, Matthew, on our next topic, because Austin Ekeler produced in a major way when Melvin Gordon was a Charger last season. Melvin Gordon is now a Bronco, and while they did draft Josh Kelly, it's not like the team made another major running back investment. So I'll start with you, Matthew. What should we expect out of Austin Ekeler this year?
Fantasy goodness is what we should expect. We should expect a huge year. I think people forget that when Melvin Gordon came back, the guy was still the 5th best running back in fantasy. From the time that Melvin Gordon returned last year until the end of the year, he was the 5th best running back in fantasy. Last year, minimum 100 carries. He led all running backs in fantasy points per touch. So you think about what happened with the Chargers this offseason. Phillip Rivers, their longtime leader, leaves. What do they have? They have Tyrod Taylor, who so far has been basically a journeyman quarterback, and they have a rookie in Justin Herbert. Whoever starts at quarterback, what do you think head coach Anthony Lynn, a former NFL running back, wants to do, especially with inexperience under center? I think he's going to feature the running backs here. And so Ekeler, who, had 10 or more fantasy points in 15 of 16 games last year, who, averages, almost 6 catches per game last year, 3rd best among running backs, 7 targets per game, 3rd best among running backs. I think he is actually the focal point of what's going to be a pretty good Chargers offense. To me, he's a clear top 10 fantasy running back this year.
All right, so Matt, I'll go to you here. You know the scheme and you know the film and the breakdown and all this on Austin Ekeler. Any reason to suspect that he won't necessarily have, the potential for 80-plus catches, even if he doesn't get to close to 100? Can we still safely feel good about 80-plus for Ekeler?
I think so, Field, because you look at the pass-catching traits. What does he do? One, he releases out of the backfield. We know we can do it in the screen game. But you look at how the Chargers also utilize him as a receiver. They'll put him in the slot. They'll flex him outside the wide receiver position, run double moves. Then you bring in Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod's not a deep ball thrower, guys. Now, he throws a great deep ball, but he's a conservative passer. I think he's going to be a conservative passer within this offense. What does that mean? The football is going to the running back more in the passing game. Look, in Tyrod's 3 years in Buffalo, he completed 79.3% of his passes to running backs. Those are high percentage throws. We're talking about throws to the flat, angle routes. When you have the shot outside, you take it. But I think that you could even see a boost in pass game targets and receptions for Ekeler this year, especially given the offensive structure and the type of thrower we know Tyrod is.
Yeah, he's so explosive, is Austin Ekeler in the open field. Can't wait to see him continue to do his thing. Mike Clay is the king of regression. Not like he regresses, isn't like he's the king of regression statistics, because Mike just continues to soar every single year. But my 2 running backs that I think people are wondering, maybe better or worse, might be hitting that regression button this year. Let's start with Aaron Jones, because every time I turned last year, he was scoring a touchdown. And also Leonard Fournette, who couldn't quite seem to find the end zone despite piling up the catches.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're exactly right. Both of these guys are the strong, maybe the 2 strongest regression to the mean candidates in fantasy this season. Aaron Jones, 19 touchdowns last season. His expected total, or opportunity adjusted touchdown total, OTD as we call it, was 10.8. That is a massive gap, almost double his expected total. That made him the 2nd luckiest in the touchdown department last season, behind only Derrick Henry. And then Leonard Fournette only scored 3 touchdowns despite a 9.3 OTD. He was the unluckiest player in football last season in the touchdown department. Yes, a study of history in the NFL shows that these guys are basically locks to score more touchdowns for Fournette and fewer for Aaron Jones. That being said, Field, look, Aaron Jones still 7th in the league in rushing yards last season, 7th in carries inside the 5. He's still a lead back for an offense that wants to run the ball even more. So I still consider him a mid-range RB1 option. I'm a little more nervous about Fournette. Why? Because, well, they apparently want to trade him, right? So that makes me a little bit nervous. Will his workload be scaled back early in the season? I don't think so. But could a team lose their running back to an injury early in the season and maybe they trade for him around at the trade deadline? It's possible, at least. There's certainly reasons to be concerned. So I still consider him a strong RB2 because we know he's going to get a huge workload early on, but I'm a little more nervous about him.
Matthew, I know no one's talked about the Packers draft class at all, but for those that missed it, they took a 2nd-round running back, A.J. Dillon, out of Boston College, a guy that I spent a lot of time watching, given that I'm a Boston resident. He's a real runner. I mean, this guy is a pure workhorse back. Does that make you concerned at all for Aaron Jones' prospects this year?
It does a little bit. I thought we were done with free Aaron Jones, and now we're back to it. We got to get all the picket signs out of storage and bring them back. It's hashtag free Aaron Jones. Here are some concerns. And I love Aaron Jones. I love him as a player. It's why I started the whole free Aaron Jones movement many years ago. But so I'm going to be the lowest on Aaron Jones because I've seen this movie. I know how it ends, right? Think about the Packers last year. They were 28th in red zone rush percentage last year. Aaron Jones himself ranked 13th among running backs in red zone carries. He averaged under 15 carries per game. So the argument for anti-Aaron Jones is like, we expect the touchdowns to come down. And does the workload increase? Like, some of the numbers that he had last year was because Jamal Williams got hurt. And so I remember at the Combine, head coach Matt LaFleur was asked, hey, did Aaron Jones show you enough last year that he could be the workhorse, the bell cow for you? And LaFleur was like, didn't say he didn't show enough, but just said, no, we expect to use both guys, meaning Jones and Jamal Williams. And he said, and honestly, I'd like to add a third, which they did, A.J. Dillon, who you don't bring in A.J. Dillon to use in the passing game. That's a hammer that you use when you get in close. I think he's like 250 pounds. So I think there's obviously going to be significant regression in terms of Aaron Jones as from a touchdown perspective. I'm nervous about him. I have him much more as a high-end RB2 than a low-end RB1. Top 12-ish guy for me.
Matt, some teams are able to make the multi-back system work, and I thought the Browns did a pretty good job of that last year, especially when they introduced Kareem Hunt back into the offense after he served that 8-game suspension. But Nick Chubb is the star of this backfield. Can he be a top 10 option in your eyes, even with a full season of Kareem Hunt?
Yeah, I think he is, Field. And let's go back to last year. Look, that was one of the most poorly run offensive structures I've seen in a while in Cleveland. They're just out there calling plays. What are we doing here? Just calling plays. And look, in some of the stuff they do, and we talk about, it looks cool. You got 2 tailbacks in the game at the same time, right? That's cool. It's not going to win the division title. It's not. It's gadget stuff. I think Nick Chubb, his running style, Kevin Stefanski's offense, we know what they want to do. Outside zone, they want to hammer the ball between the tackles. Look, in his 2 years in the league with Nick Chubb, the only running back who's averaged more yards after first contact is Derrick Henry. Okay? Yeah. He can get downhill. He's a great inside runner. It gives you screens and swings in the pass game. Not a ton of upside there. I think he's the number 1 running back in Cleveland. I think it's his natural running traits, his power, his ability to work through contact that keeps him in that top 10 range.
So, Mike, do you think there's a running back who is the number 2 on his team who has more value in fantasy this year than Kareem Hunt? Because he's still close to like a top 25 play in our ranks.
No question about it. First of all, an elite handcuff, right? It's to Nick Chubb. I mean, honestly, if you take out the top 32 running backs in the NFL in terms of the 32 starters, who's going to be number 1? Probably Kareem Hunt, right? I mean, what a situation. We know the efficiency has been there for him. So really a lot to like from that perspective. And then he has some standalone value. We saw it last season. In fact, from week 9, once he came back, he was only a handful of points behind Nick Chubb in terms of fantasy production. We love, he doesn't get a ton of carries, obviously, with Chubb there, but he does get a lot in the passing game. I think maybe the target share comes down a little bit just because of the Kevin Stefanski offense and they want to feed it through the tight end position, but he's still going to be a huge factor. So plenty of value here for Kareem Hunt in the middle rounds.
All right, I agree there. Kareem Hunt, really an interesting player, especially with the passing game value he has. Nobody, and I mean nobody, evaluates Cardinals running backs better than Matthew Berry. Matthew, you know when we have a Kenyan Drake question, it has to be asked to you. Kenyan Drake took over last year. He's no Chase Edmonds, but he did take over and play pretty well enough to earn a transition tag. Does he have top 5 upside for a full season? Because David Johnson, no longer there. Chase Edmonds, the only guy in the backfield that kind of really, as far as what we have seen already, you feel like is even a threat for some work.
So, yes, the answer is, does he have top 5 upside? He does have top 5 upside because we've seen it in Arizona. From the time that he became the starter in Arizona from week 9 on last year, he was the 3rd best running back in fantasy. So we've seen it. Can he do it for a full season? We will see. But remember, this is a guy that last year, when he got from Arizona week 9 on, 19 touches a game, over 100 scrimmage yards a game, 8 touchdowns. That was tied for 3rd among players. 3rd most fantasy points per game, as we talked about. He was the 2nd best running back in fantasy during the fantasy playoffs, weeks 15 and 16, right? Played on 79% of snaps. And to your point, they sent David Johnson to Houston, the franchise running back. Chase Edmonds, I think they view merely as a backup. I was on a podcast last week, and someone described Kenyan Drake to me as this year's Dalvin Cook. And I thought, that's an interesting comparison. I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet, because I don't think Drake is as talented as Dalvin Cook, but this is going to be a very fantasy-friendly offense. It's going to be one that gives every opportunity to Kenyan Drake. And you think about how they run. just sending guys deep, right? Somebody like DeAndre Hopkins stretches the field, which opens up the underneath stuff for Kenyan Drake, who's a nice pass-catching running back. I think he's a top 10 play to start, and he certainly got the upside.
Mike, do you buy the idea that Drake will stay the workhorse, though? That was the big knock on him until he became a bigger factor in Miami was, I'm not sure this guy can actually handle, let's say, 300 touches in a season.
Absolutely. I think they find him to be a terrific fit for this offense. And, I mean, the proof is what they did this offseason, right? They got rid of David Johnson. Chase Edmonds is his backup right now, but he was well behind him on the depth chart last season. They gave Drake the transition tag, which you don't see very often. That was a clear commitment to bring him back, that they wanted to spend some cash and have that feature back, and Drake and him on the team. And what else did they add as competition? A 7th-round pick on Eno Benjamin. I mean, it's pretty clear that they expect to use Drake as their workhorse again. And this is a guy that played almost 80% of the snaps last season, as Matthew mentioned. So I think I don't want to go top 5. Again, I think that's a little too rich, but is he an RB1, a top 10, top 12 option? Absolutely.
All right, so Matt, part of the reason why Kenyan Drake was acquired by Arizona was that they just had sort of soured on David Johnson. Right. He gets traded to Houston this offseason. Melvin Gordon signs with the Broncos, and Todd Gurley, after being released by the Rams, goes to the Falcons. What do you expect from those 3 big names?
Well, I'm a little lower on Gurley. I mean, I really am. That's just what I see on film, Field. I mean, I don't see the juice. I just don't. Look, you have to understand what Todd Gurley really is. He's a straight-line power runner. I didn't see the straight-line juice. I didn't see the power. Okay, now he's going to an offense that's really, if you look at it, pass-heavy. Atlanta led the league in pass percentage since 2018. And also the explosive plays have dropped on Gurley. 9.4 of his carries gained 10-plus yards last season. That's down from 13.8 in 2017 and 2018. With David Johnson, it's Bill O'Brien. Is he committed to running the football? Is he committed to run the football field? I don't know that. I haven't seen it from him. I think they're going to be a more perimeter offense this year. That's why you go out and you get Brandon Cooks to pair with Will Fuller, speed down the field. Again, more play action throwing with Deshaun Watson. Is David Johnson a fit for what they do? 100% he's a fit for what they do. But I want to see Bill O'Brien show me he actually committed to running the football, because I haven't seen it as of yet.
Be really interesting, certainly. So let's just go from like a player assessment value, Matthew. So I think David Johnson is one of those players that we all recall the apex, 2017, I believe it was, 2016, when he had 20 total touchdowns and 80 catches, plus 1,000 rushing yards. Do you believe in him as a player, and do you still believe in Todd Gurley as a player? Because that's a big part of this equation.
So 2 things. So their fantasy value isn't always tied to their abilities as a player, right? We talk about this. Fantasy success comes from 2 things. It comes from talent, and it also comes from opportunity. In terms of the talent with David Johnson, look, this is a guy that had over 20 fantasy points per game, over 17 touches a game, first 6 weeks of the season. He was the 5th best running back in fantasy the first 6 weeks of the season before he got hurt in Arizona. And then I think, and I don't really have any stats for this, Field, but I just think about logic. Think about Saquon Barkley when Saquon Barkley came into the NFL. The Giants got so much grief for passing on Sam Darnold, for taking a running back that high. They needed Saquon Barkley to work, and he got a massive workload. Like, if nothing else went right for the Giants his rookie year, Saquon Barkley was going to have a big year. And I think the same thing happens here with David Johnson. I think that Bill O'Brien and the Texans got so much criticism for DeAndre Hopkins in that trade. They need David Johnson to work. And you think about that offense last year, this is loosey-goosey math, but Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson, 2 players who are not as good as David Johnson. Last year, if you took their numbers and combined them, would have been the 5th best running back in fantasy. So that running back position on the Texans offense can be fantasy friendly. And I think David Johnson just gets a massive workload. Is he going to be the most efficient running back in the NFL? No, he is not. But I think just a massive workload and opportunity masks what may be a declining skill set there.
Mike, is Le'Veon Bell still a legit workhorse and valuable fantasy asset after what you saw last year?
Well, I have him at RB17. You know, I'm going to chase the volume, right? So I still think he is on the RB2 radar. I know it was a rough first season with the Jets, but look, even missing a game, still no lower than 11th among running backs in carries, targets, receptions, receiving yards. Volume is king for sure. Now, he only had the 4th. The efficiency was horrific, but he still finished RB16 in fantasy. Again, missing a game I think that his floor will be pretty high because of the volume, and I think his efficiency will actually be better this season behind what was a completely overhauled offensive line. The pressure on Darnold last year, the run blocking, it was really, really bad. I mean, really bad last season. It should be improved here in 2020. So I do think he'll be better and give you kind of a solid RB2 sort of floor, but I don't think that ceiling that he had in Pittsburgh is I think that's a long way gone. He's just not there anymore.
I actually think, Phil, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, just to tag onto that real quickly, I think Le'Veon Bell is a post-hype sleeper this year because so many people were burned last year. I agree with Mike. I think that offense is going to be a lot better. I don't think people appreciate how much work they've done on that offensive line. And yes, he's going to get a massive workload. So I actually think Le'Veon Bell, who's I've never been a huge fan of, but I actually think he's a post-hype sleeper this year. I am at running back 15 this year.
There actually are some legitimate circumstances surrounding Le'Veon Bell you guys have alluded to. Better offensive line. Still not a great wide receiver group. They did use a fourth-round pick on the Michael Pirine, but otherwise not a crowded backfield. I'm going to go to Matt and Mike on two players from last year that were rookies. One of them, I think, maybe exceeded expectations by the end of the year, and one of them who just frustrated us all season. Matt, Chicago is home for you. David Montgomery was traded up for last year out of Iowa State. I believe you were a fan of his running in college, but it didn't quite happen last year in Chicago. Are you bullish on his prospects this upcoming year?
Well, it goes back to what Matthew just said, talent versus fantasy fit and fantasy production. I don't have no question on David Montgomery in terms of his talent as a runner. He has elusive traits. He's got great contact balance. We know he can catch the ball in the backfield. It's the usage. It's the offensive structure. One, you got to start with who's the starting quarterback here. Field. Is it Nick Foles or Mr. Trubisky? That has to be brought into the equation. You're going to have to wait for training camp. But also, they're going to be committed to actually running the football. Look, they drafted Cole Kmet in the second round, a tight end out of Notre Dame. He's your classic on-the-line tight end. They want someone on the edge because Jimmy Graham is not going to impact the run game in Chicago. They want someone on the edge to add an extra running game. I think David Montgomery will see a boost. And look, he got better as the year went on. It's not much. Weeks 1 to 12, 3.3 yards per carry. That's not going to work, okay? Weeks 13 to 17, jumped up to 4.3 yards per carry. Okay, so a little bit better as the season progressed. I still think for me, he's in that flex range. If I'm doing my standard, non-PPR rankings field, right now he's right on the edge of RB2 or in that flex range for me because I got to see what they're going to be offensively, who's the quarterback, and is Matt Nagy really want to run the football? That's another thing. Does he really want to run the football or does he want to chuck it around?
Mike, it feels like Miles Sanders has been sort of an off-season winner. The Eagles have done a little bit of window dressing at the running back spot, but most of their major investments this year on offense have been at wide receiver. What is his outlook for this year?
I think it's a look. He's my RB14. I think his targets might come down a little bit with Boston Scott there, who was terrific last season, and obviously you have an improved wide receiver room. You have a healthy wide receiver room, so that could cost him some targets. But look, Jordan is gone. I mean, it's a pretty clear path back duties here for Miles Sanders, as well as a huge chunk of the carries. He was also super efficient as a pass catcher last. It's not like that's going to completely go away. And keep in mind, RB15 the last season in fantasy, he didn't play more than 53% of the snaps in a game until week 11. So plenty to like here for Miles Sanders in his second season.
He certainly surged at the end of last year. I want each one of you to name a rookie, so we got to keep it tight here. Matthew, I read your love-hate column from the offseason. Great work. I was going to say as always, but do I really mean that? No, I kid. Great work as always. Your top rookie running back is?
Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I can't imagine there's anyone that disagrees with me.
No.
You talk about scheme and opportunity, like that player in an Andy Reid offense is just ridiculous. And the comp has been made. Brian Westbrook was a top 7 fantasy running back for 6 straight seasons with Andy Reid. Give me all the Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year.
All right, Mike, what name that comes to mind for you, perhaps a little bit further down in the draft order amongst running backs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with Edwards-Helaire as the number one. But next up for me, maybe a little controversial. I'm going DeAndre Swift in Detroit. And look, I kind of like Kerryon Johnson. I think he could be kind of a post-type breakout guy. But Swift is a little bit more of an all-around player. He was in Georgia's pro-style offense. He had a ton of carries, actually 440 carries and 73 catches. We know that he can do it all. Was almost a first-round pick. He was picked 34th overall, so there's plenty of pedigree to go along with that in terms of draft capital. Kerryon, I think we saw last season before he was injured, kind of committed to the running game, not as much as a pass catcher. So I think maybe you'll see some of that. And with Swift, Mixon is a change of pace rusher and certainly their primary pass catching back. So that's enough, I think, to get him into the RB2 conversation. And honestly, maybe he just blows right by Johnson and is their feature right away. So 26 on my board. There's room for even more.
All right. So Matt, last one, go to you now. Great offensive line in Indianapolis. Is Jonathan Taylor about to run to daylight?
I love Jonathan Taylor. In terms of a runner, what he brings to a pro offense, I know Matthews talked about him previously right after the draft as well. Look, Jonathan Taylor has the best running traits of this draft class. He knows how to stack moves, contact, balance, vision. He's run the same offense. What's changed? He's got a great offensive line behind him with guys that are going to pull, create daylight, get into the second level. He has home run ability. He ran a 4.39 at the combine. And also, let's not pretend like he never caught a pass at the University of Wisconsin. We're not playing high school football here in a wing T offense. He does have some pass game traits, screens, swings, get him loose a little bit on the angle routes out of the backfield. I think as the season progresses, he earns that number one role in Indianapolis over Marlon Mack as your first and second down runner with red zone value as well.
Yeah, the Colts definitely got younger at the skill group on offense for the draft this year with Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. Can't wait to see both of them. Matthew, the running backs in San Francisco are tough to trust because there's so many of them. But Matt Breida is now a Dolphin. Tevin Coleman has, he did run fine late last season, but it felt like Raheem Mostert established himself as the star. But how much are you trusting Raheem Mostert?
Trust is a strong word, Field.
I've heard you say that.
How many times have we seen Kyle Shanahan literally stand up and tell the press, oh, yeah, Tevin Coleman's our guy, and then Mostert gets all the run, or vice versa, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's been plenty of times where Shanahan likes to go with a hot hand. Having said that, the 49ers, third in rush percentage last year, and oh, by the way, they just added Trent Williams. Don't get me started on the whole situation there as a Redskins fan, but, like, they're just going to maul people on the offensive line, and I think they run enough, and they're so efficient running-wise, that multiple running backs can be fantasy relevant in San Francisco. I prefer Mostert over to Coleman because of what we saw last year. This is a guy who led all running backs in yards per carry. He was second among running backs in rushes per touchdown. He had 8 touchdowns over the final 6 weeks of the season. They came within 7 minutes of winning the Super Bowl, and it wasn't Raheem Mostert's fault that they didn't. I mean, he ran well. He was second among running backs in yards per rush before first contact, top 10 among running backs in yards per rush after first contact. He's got speed. He's tough to bring down. He doesn't have the injury concerns that a Tevin Coleman does or Jerick McKinnon. We'll see if they get anything out of him this year. So for me, I think Raheem Mostert is the lead running back of a committee in San Francisco and is a very a high upside flex, low-end RB2 that I think will be overlooked because of people are overly concerned about the running back by committee, which will exist. But again, they run so much, he'll be effective.
Yeah, it's a fascinating offense because whoever is a starter, if there is one starter, the upside's immense. They're really good at running the ball. We just don't know how consistently we will actually see that be just one running back week to week. Tom Brady is now a Buccaneer.
Can we officially call him Raheem Mostert? Raheem must start.
You want to make that happen? Yeah, go ahead.
It's the offseason. I'm working stuff out.
Yeah, I think you know what, Matthew? Why don't you handle that one? And it's all yours. That one is entirely yours. I'll think of a different nickname for Raheem Mostert. Tom Brady is gone. James White has been an incredible player for the Patriots. I love this stat. You know, he's never, ever lost a fumble in his, I think, 6 seasons in the NFL, maybe 7 now. The guy is very dependable. But, Matt, is he as dependable for fantasy football purposes with Jarrett Stidham as the presumptive starter and all the catches that James White has received from Tom Brady in previous years?
Maybe it takes a slight dip, okay, because you have a new quarterback and a young quarterback that does not have much of any game experience. But we're talking about throws that you teach high school quarterbacks, right? Can you throw to the flat? Can you hit the running back on the screen? Can you, when he runs a quick out route underneath, can you set him up and give him the ball in the upfield shoulder so he can run after the catch? Speaking of the dependability of James White, White has just dropped 1 third-down pass in the last 3 seasons. That's 96 targets. And look how they utilize the running backs. We know what they're going to do. They're going to get them on the backside of trip sets, the great matchups underneath. It's not so much vertical shots with their running backs. It's run after the catch situation. So does he drop a little bit? Sure, I think you can expect that with a new young quarterback who's never been in those game situations. That's the thing you worry about as a coach. He's never been in these game situations. The flip side of that is, because he's never been in those game situations, let's let him throw the running back. Let's give him something easy underneath. When it's 3rd and 2 to 6, let's get him the ball to James White underneath. So I think there's a slight dip. But he's still got a guy I want in my roster. He just might be more in that flex range.
I think the thing about James White, and the reason why I have him ranked right on the border of RB2 or flex, is that he'll probably finish this year top 30 in running back points because he so rarely misses time. He piles up catches, and he has a few games a year where he might go for 10 or 12 catches. It just may not be that he has top 15 upside every single week unless the Patriots really commit to spreading things out and maybe are a little bit less of a power running offense this year. The Bucs are going to air it out aplenty this year, Mike, a ton, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Gronk and O.J. Howard and Cameron Braid and Tyler Johnson. But how about this running game? How much do you expect out of this running game, and who do you think it'll be? Is it Ronald Jones? Is it Keyshawn Vaughn? Who has a chance to, if there is a potential RB2 in this backfield, who has a chance to be that guy?
I mean, if we learn anything from the Patriots, we just talked about James White obviously has been fantasy relevant in PPR quite a while, as well as other Patriots backs at times. Well, it could be both, right? Both have an opportunity to do that. And look, I think that there's plenty of fantasy points to be had here. There's going to be more scoring opportunities in this Buccaneers offense and perhaps more targets. Brady under center instead of Jameis Winston. Yes, all eyes are kind of on the rookie here, the 3rd round, Sean Vaughn. But look, the rookies have a more fantasy resume. They just don't pretty very much. We've seen that historically, certainly over the past decade. So I'm a little bit more right now by Ronald Jones. He's bigger than Vaughn, and he's also, believe it or not, younger, even though he's entering his 3rd season, was over 1,000 yards, had 6 touchdowns and around 200 touches last season. And that guy was playing fewer than 40% of the snaps. It's very possible we have not seen his best work yet or his highest usage. I'm really intrigued by him this season. I think he's going to come very undervalued in drafts.
All right, Matthew, your thoughts on this Buccaneers offense? I know you'd been bullish on Tom Brady inside the top 10. What do you make of this backfield?
Yeah, I understand what Mike's saying about Ronald Jones, but the fact is that Ronald Jones has had 2 years in this Buccaneers offense and hasn't really impressed. He's not a Bruce Arians guy. Arians inherited him, but he did just draft Keyshawn Vaughn in the 3rd round and talked about him post-draft that he thinks of Vaughn as a true 3-down back. Here's a guy that had over 1,000 yards 2 straight seasons at Vanderbilt. He was 3rd on Vanderbilt's team last year in terms of reception. So he's somebody that's been used in the passing game and in the running game, obviously. Scored a lot of touchdowns here. Ronald Jones didn't get a lot of red zone work last year as well. Ultimately, however, this comes down to Tom Brady. Who's Tom want on the field with him, right? Tom's going to dictate that. Who does he trust in pass protection? Who does he trust to be where he needs him at all times in the field? Is that Ronald Jones or Keyshawn Vaughn? I think Tom comes into it with no preconceived notions. But the point is that Keyshawn Vaughn's going, mid-tier in drafts and has a real opportunity to be the starting running back, a 3-down back in a Tom Brady, Bruce Arians offense that we think is going to score a lot and be efficient. So I think for me, the upside there of being that guy in that offense, it's worth taking a mid-round pick on Keyshawn Vaughn to see if he's the guy. I prefer him to Ronald Jones.
All right, so we'll figure out what Tom thinks at some point, hopefully. Maybe he'll tell us via the Instagram. Let's move along to players outside the top 30 because there are so many backs that at least are on the radar. And let's talk about valuable handcuffs. I'll begin with you, Mike. Who are a pair of running backs that each of them would have standalone substantial value if the player in front of them on the depth chart got banged up?
Yeah, well, we'll start with Latavius Murray, who, if not Kareem Hunt, we talked about earlier, is the most valuable handcuff in fantasy. Murray is 30 now. He did not have standalone value last season when Alvin Kamara was healthy. However, he missed week 7-8, did Kamara. Murray stepped in at over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns on 60 touches. He was the top scoring fantasy running back during that span. So he is an elite handcuff. He's the kind of guy that you want to consider for a bench spot. And guys, the other one is a bit younger, Tony Pollard for Dallas. I think we all kind of, when he was drafted, the narrative there was he would always just be kind of a change of pace guy. But, I think we saw more than that, and we actually saw sort of a commitment from them for him to be Zeke's backup. In fact, when Zeke was holding out, it looked like Pollard was going to be their feature back. He played well. He only had 101 touches, but he averaged over 5.3 yards per carry, and his yards after contact, guys, was best in the NFL. Again, the small sample, but very effective once he was touched for the time. So really intrigued by him if something happens to Ellie, and that's very much a possibility considering that he is a workhorse in the NFL. So Pollard and Murray, 2 guys I'm looking for bench spots.
How about you, Matt? Any other names to throw into the conversation about handcuffs?
Well, like we talked about at the top of the show with Dalvin Cook, if you draft Dalvin Cook, I would recommend you draft Alexander Mattison. One, because of the durability concerns with Cook, and also Madison's running style and how he fits in the offense. They will get him on the edge and toss schemes. He can get downhill with power, gives you a little bit in the pass game, not a true pass game threat. But again, look at what Minnesota does in the pass game. They throw screens to the running backs. Just try to get him loose in space. Another one is Zach Moss, rookie out of Utah, behind Devin Singletary in Buffalo. Why? Downhill power offense. Zach Moss, I'm telling you, you watch the college tape on this guy. He is a hammer at the point of attack. If you're a defensive back, and you go up there standing straight up and down, you're going to be on the ground now. He's going to run right through. You better get your pads down against this guy. He's got good red zone value. I like his fit in Buffalo. And again, if there's something happens to Singletary, his fantasy stock really elevates quickly.
Yeah, we know that handcuffs are incredibly valuable. Mike mentioned earlier that Leonard Fournette, his future in Jacksonville is murky. So if you're doing some early drafting, you might want to consider a guy like Raquel Armstead, who would be the next man up for the Jags. Matthew, before we wrap this up, is there a running back or a team or a group of running backs that you don't think we've paid enough attention to that might merit some consideration in fantasy on the radar this year?
Well, I was going to mention Zach Moss, so I'm glad Matt brought him up as well. So he would be somebody that I would mention, but this guy isn't even qualified at running back right now, but I'm going to argue for him to be so. Antonio Gibson, drafted by my Washington Redskins, and I get it. Barry, you're a homer. They have 8 billion running backs there. I understand all that. But think about the kind of offense that Scott Turner wants to run under Ron Rivera, right? And so they're not going to be able to just hat on a hat beat defenses this year. That's an offense that's going to be challenged. They've got to get clever. They've got to scheme. And so Antonio Gibson, who played both wide receiver and running back, was all over the place last year, a very versatile player. It's somebody who, in the post-game press conferences, both Scott Turner and Ron Rivera compared to Christian McCaffrey in terms of the skill set and the versatility. I'm not saying Antonio Gibson is Christian McCaffrey, okay? I'm not even going to say he's going to get that kind of use. But what I'll tell you is that, and we saw Albert Breer report this as well, Antonio Gibson's going to get time with both the running backs group and the wide receivers group. He's going to train with both positions. He's going to be used both ways. They're going to make him a true hybrid and try to find different ways to get the ball in his hands to take advantage of his versatility and his athleticism. And you think about this Redskins offense. You've got 35-year-old Adrian Peterson. You've got Darius Geis, who has struggled with injuries. You've got Bryce Love, who's coming off of an ACL and didn't play all last year. J.D. McKissick and Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber may not make the team, and J.D. McKissick's a third down back at all. Antonio Gibson is somebody that, given the lack of options they have in both the passing game and in terms of we haven't seen somebody establish themselves as a consistent runner, I think he's going to get a ton of opportunity in this in this Washington Redskins offense, similar to what the Panthers did last year. They're going to try to find different ways to use Gibson. So that's just somebody that I think needs to be on people's radars.
Mike, anybody else to add on your radar there?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Tariq Cohen here. We talked about David Montgomery earlier, and look, this Bears backfield was not really addressed during the draft or free agency, right? It's still Montgomery and still Tariq Cohen. So, I'm thinking about Cohen, like I always liked James White the past couple of years. So we also talked about maybe you're worried about that offense now with Tom Brady and you want to find that kind of cheat code, that PP code there at running back. If you don't want to go White, maybe try Tariq Cohen, right? I mean, he could be that guy. He's fourth among running backs in targets and receptions since he entered the NFL. Won't get many carries or goal line work, a lot like James White, but he has 70-plus catches each of the past 2 seasons, finished 11th in fantasy in 2018, 27th last season. And look, his efficiency was horrific last season. Don't get me wrong, but still was a top 30 fantasy running back. And again, they didn't really add competition, so he's still going to play a substantial role in passing situations. I think that, again, if you're looking for kind of a sneaky PPR option, you can get at a discount. Tariq Cohen is an excellent high-floor target.
Matthew, I think you just mentioned at the beginning of that answer on Antonio Gibson, but where he's going to actually be declared position-wise, he's a running back in our game, for those that are wondering. He is now, as of right now, declared as a running back in ESPN Fantasy. Matt, how about you?
He's a running back, not a wide receiver.
He is a running back in our game, yes.
Okay, great.
How about you, Matt? What do you got?
Well, I agree with Matthew and how they're going to utilize him. I think it's a great point, Matthew, in talking about, scheme-wise, like Christian McCaffrey, especially routes out of the backfield. For me, it's Cam Akers from Florida State. Let's go back to the draft class field. Look, that number one job is wide open right now in Los Angeles. We know Henderson's there. We understand that there's going to be competition for the number one spot. Cam Akers is a professional runner. That's what he is. Turn on the Florida State tape. He ran behind a poor offensive line, still ran with power. He's got enough juice to get to the edge. When he gets in the open field, he's got really good vision. So, again, what does LA do in the pass game? Boot, running back to the flat. Boot, running back screen. He fits there. That's a guy I think can earn that number one job and slide into that RB2 range at some point during the season.
Good stuff there. I'll mention one last name, and just because I don't really know how he'll be used, but I think he's interesting. Lynn Bowden from Kentucky. Bowden. There are a lot of Bowdens and Bowdens in college football, so sometimes I misremember which where the emphasis belongs. But he was an awesome player for the Wildcats. Actually played quarterback last year out of necessity. The Raiders say they're going to use him as a running back. He may be designated as a wide receiver. Have to get clarity there, but a really interesting piece alongside Josh Jacobs in that backfield, depending on how things shake out in the Las Vegas offense in the first year, of course, playing in their new home. So the running back position is always the most important one in fantasy football because the difference between Christian McCaffrey and the 15th best running back is a lot more substantial than the difference between Michael Thomas and the 15th best wide receiver. It's a very difficult position to find studs. We've got 3 studs right here: Matthew Berry, Matt Bowen, Mike Clay. Final word, Lynn Bowden is declared as a running back on ESPN Fantasy.
Hey, Field.
It is official. Hey, Matthew.
I was just going to say, since Mike Clay is sitting there with a Jordan Howard jersey behind him, I just want to mention him real quick since we didn't bring it up. I think, keep in mind, the Dolphins really improved their offensive line, both in the draft, and they really improved, and they improved their offense, right? Whether it's going to be Fitzy or Tua under center, they improved that offense overall, and they were linked to a number of big-name running backs. Ultimately, they make the trade for Matt Breida, which was a nice move for them, but I thought that was actually really good for Jordan Howard's fantasy value this year because Matt Breida is somebody who has struggled with injuries throughout his career, has struggled to stay on the field, and certainly when they get in close. Since Jordan Howard has come to the NFL, he's been one of the league leaders in scoring touchdowns. He's as good as there is when you get in close. And so I think even if it's a split between those two guys, Jordan Howard has some real flex RB2 upside because I think that offense is going to be better. And I think he's going to get at least half, if not more, of the work there, given the injury concerns of Matt Breida. So I think everyone saw the Breida move and was just like, so much for Jordan Howard. But I wouldn't sleep on him. I actually think he's going to have fantasy value, especially what I expect to be a depressed ADP for people worried about Jordan Howard because he's not a sexy name, but he will produce. He's a good running back.
Miami offense looks a lot better on paper, and Jordan Howard has a chance to be a big part of that. For Mike Clay and Matthew Berry and Matt Bowen, I'm Field Yates. That's the stuff you need to know about running back fantasy football for 2020.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.